Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the last and final session of Alt+Shift+Studio Fractured Grid, this summer edition. And my name's Sabi. I'm the Associate Director and Curator at the Ishara Art Foundation. I'm sitting in Dubai, and if you want to know more about the Ishara Art Foundation, you can visit our website. But in a nutshell, we're a foundation dedicated to contemporary art from South Asia and South Asian diaspora. We bring together exhibitions, programs, symposia, workshops, and this is part of our online summer program titled Alt+Shift+Studio. And I'm going to make a brief introduction, but before I do, let me just say that this session is being recorded. It's going to run for about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes. After my introduction, it's going to be followed by a more specific introduction by my colleague Himanshu. Himanshu is the curator of this year's edition, and he's brought together the artists that you would have heard in the past few episodes and today's episode. We are focusing primarily on the definition of what is an artist's studio in the 21st century. And so let me introduce this program to you. Alt+Shift+Studio comprises of artist conversations and video tours that explore how contemporary artists redefine the idea of the artist studio in the 21st century. The artists in the series are those with whom we've worked before and have had prolonged conversations at Ishara, and we're delighted to bring some of those conversations to you. An impulse behind this web series was to take the pulse of contemporary art practice to the ways in which infrastructures meet ideas. One could argue that the idea of a studio has undergone a radical change from what it signified in some parts of the world after the middle of 20th century. It was a space of isolation in which artists drew from their inspiration and produced artworks. These are often pictured as large spaces, sometimes stacked with canvases and sculptures, and a solitary male figure that looms large. Something like an artist's genius sitting contemplating in their studio, right? But what if we were to say that that was a fantasy that is still perpetuated in art schools and in novels and in movies, in many parts of the world, and that in fact modern contemporary artists in most other parts of the world never really operated that way, even though they might have aspired to it. What if we were to say that an artist studio in Hong Kong or Dubai or Delhi or Shanghai has a very unique relationship with the city, all of them different from one another? And this is a fact, because if you go to different cities in the world, you will see different kinds of studios based on real estate prices. In some cities, you may not even find studios because the real estate prices are so high. So what if we were to say that each artist's practice produces a different idea and a different image of the studio, and thereby also a different image of the city because of the sites and the processes that their practice demands? And what other image of the artist studio then would we carry with us? Now, this is a contention I've had for a long time, which is to say that, artists bring the weirdest combinations of practices and materials and techniques together. Someone's working with a welder and a printer. These two industries may rarely come together, but because of an artist, they end up having an interface. And so you end up having a very different relationship or network in the city, welded together or threaded together by a very fragile kind of connection of a single artist's practice. Another impulse for this series draws inspiration from an initiative conceived by Rux Media Collective, an artist collective from Delhi, titled City a Studio. This was part of the Sarai program in Delhi between 2010 and 2013. City Studio created context for high-intensity, interdisciplinary processes at different locations in the city. Sometimes these processes were rendered as an exhibition, at other times as a gathering, a get-together, as a library, as a temporary archive, or as an occasion for performances, conversations, and debates. At still other times, it took the form of a workshop, a temporary atelier, a media studio, a publication, or an online platform. So the whole city became a studio between those 3 years for almost 20 people who got together in this program. Alt+Shift+Studio is a series of dialogues that takes place almost a decade after City Studio was first begun. Many shifts have occurred in the field since then, and I hope that you'll find through the different presentations, which you can view on the Ishara YouTube page and on our website, the changing contours of contemporary art practice. The studio in some places becomes an interface. For some people, the studio is a space for just get-togethers and having tea. There's also the idea of a portable studio, a city on the move. For many artists, in fact, they don't work in a single location as a studio. They're moving studios based on the residency programs that they keep getting, based on the different places they keep traveling to. In some cases, the studio is the home. For another artist, the studio is a bus. Every day they draw while they're on bus rides. So the studio is many, many things. And this question becomes especially relevant today where so many people are on the move, when so many people are creating their lives away from whatever their domicile would be or their growing up cities might be. It's also all the more pressing now because, as I mentioned earlier, rents or real estate sometimes gets very high. When I actually moved to Dubai for the very first time, the first thing I started looking for was where are the artist studios, and most artists I met, they would often say, oh, actually we don't have a studio, we work from home or we work on our laptop. And this got me thinking that actually, if you don't have a studio, how are you making work? Which then makes you say that, in fact, maybe the studio is not a single site, but a network of sites spread across the city, that you do your printing in one place, you do your ideation in another place, you do your production in another place. So actually, my studio is not one place, but many places that come together when I do a project. And that's really the impulse behind the conversation that we're having. The artist that we have today is Omer Wasim. I'm not going to introduce Omer because my colleague Himanshu will. I'm going to hand it over to Himanshu now, who's the curator of this edition. He's going to introduce the specific theme that this edition is looking at, and then he'll give an introduction to Omer. The session today is, as I mentioned, an hour to 10 minutes. If you have any questions after the presentation by Omer, you can put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I will be moderating, so I will read them out in the end, and Himanshu and Omer will be responding to them. Thank you again for joining. I'm going to sign off my video, and Himanshu comes on board. Himanshu?
Thank you, Sabi, for such a comprehensive mapping of what Alt+Shift+Studio really started as. And I thank you for the conversation that that led us to actually conceive this series. Many of our internal discussion led about thinking about the grid-like structures in our surroundings, which both porous and fragile at the same time. And for me, Alt+Shift+Studio kind of reimagines contemporary practices that navigate between media and data. But at the same time, it's also, as Sabi kind of pointed out, is a network of production consumption platform that kind of respond to the shift that is happening. And as a part of 2023 edition, Alt+Shift+Studio interrogates some of these questions through the theme of fractured grids. When I was a student of archaeology, box grid was one of the techniques that we used for excavation, and that left a kind of a section of a site undisturbed, yet allowed us to see the deposits that are beneath the layers. Allowing this, almost like using this box grid approach to the artist practice studios, we can think and we can peek into the concepts of production, collaboration, friendship, and solidarities that kind of exist within the artistic studio practices. The notion of grid kind of implies endlessness, but in the sense of rigidity and structure. The grid rationalize control, the exercise power, expand discipline, and colonize, in spite of its open-ending nature. Fracture grid try to explore how art practices are shaped both inside and outside of a studio spaces, in manner that offer multiple paths for navigation. This edition offering insights into how ecologies, civil movements, war, migration not only shape contemporary art, but also offer nuanced ways to think about spaces where the art happens. And we'll also move throughout this series, we kind of move to different cities, whether it's Jaffna, Kashmir, Dubai, Sharjah, Abu Dhabi to Karachi. Through our internal discussions about fracture grid, we kind of looked at practices that engage local narratives, thereby enabling the ripple effect that it produces. Omer's work revolves around the narratives that are constantly changing, shaping by various fluxes and navigating through them. As a part of his practice, he challenges the fixated narrative and thus questioning the nation state approach towards communities. He uncovers the layers of the present as a chronicler. Now, I'd like to shortly introduce Umair. He was born in Karachi, where he is currently based. He is he is an intermediate artist whose practice is informed by the radical queer politics, which mediates his response to the space to subvert the frames of development, infrastructure, everyday wars that shape human relationships to cities and nature. His work bears witness to the relentless erasure, violence, destruction of our time by staying within more than human bodies. His solo and collaborative projects have been shown in Jameel Art Center in Dubai, Coach Studios in Delhi, Columboscope Art Festival in Colombo, Sonspic 2024 Forces Theme Distance on Labor and its Sonic Ecologies in Arnhem, the Yokohama Triennale 2020, the Dhaka Summit in 2018 and 2020, the Karachi Biennale in 2017 and 2019, at Kunstam in Vienna, Contour Fitzgerald Gallery at Harvard College, the International Public Arts Festival in Karachi, and Cairo Video Festival in 2017. Yeah. Can we now move forward? Sabi, could you please start the video?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Omer, for such an amazing insight, for allowing us to actually peek into some of your current projects and the kind of three projects that you're currently engaged with, and also kind of allowing us to see and understand like how radically different it is to think about what we kind of conceive as a studio into this time. And because three of your projects kind of took such a long time to develop, I think a kind of an in-depth discussion is necessary around some of them. So I'm just going to ask you very few questions, and hopefully we're able to uncover more about how we kind of form these projects and ideas, and how we kind of look at studio as a much larger entity than it kind of conceived in a traditional notion. The first question is related to your project Safarnama, and you kind of touch upon the idea of center and the periphery in cities ecology, from natural elements to the man-made actions. There are references that kind of allow viewers through the natural and the sacred world to kind of navigate through natural and the sacred world. How does this project kind of emerge, and what kind of infrastructure was involved into its creation?
Hey, hello everyone. Safarnama is a collaborative project that I worked on with Shahana Rajani, and we were commissioned by TVA 21 and Coach to take this on, and we wanted to kind of arrive at looking at toxicities in the air from a different position. And so I think that this was also being developed, and we were thinking about this during lockdown. We were just also thinking about how to kind of arrive at it from a position that was different. I think that gins are, whenever you go out for field work in South Asia, I think you kind of run into or hear gin stories, I mean, they're very, they're part of like everyday life. So, and gins are invisible sort of beings made of fire and air. And they're able to kind of like move from one place to another, and able to witness things that are kind of not accessible to humans. And the state has created so much invisibility around infrastructural projects in Pakistan, and we were just also thinking about how to bear witness to something that we are not necessarily able to see or witness. So we kind of were thinking about how this kind of gin would move through emerging infrastructures that were sort of connecting different parts of Pakistan through CPEC. So I mean, a lot of this involved site visits and sort of taking day trips to Thar and Urmara in Balochistan, and then also starting like close by in Malir, where we kind of were able to sort of witness and participate in a Gwati ceremony also. And I think that we gathered a lot of the material that was put together by Mudassir Sheikh, who's an amazing sound designer based in Germany. So I think that a lot of the work was happening in conversations between Karachi, Delhi, and Berlin, or somewhere in Germany. I don't know where Mudassir necessarily was in 2020, but So I think that did I answer your question? I mean, I think I'm not very good at sort of
No, you did.
things.
You did pretty. No, you did. Like you said exactly what I was asking for. I was asking for the kind of infrastructure of network that kind of exists while creating a project, and I think that kind of came out pretty well and beautifully. And I think also kind of continuing, I just kind of taking away from what you just spoke about gin. I think in one of our previous conversation you mentioned that the importance of the saint's history in placemaking and the absence of an alternative narrative. Could you please elaborate on that? Because I think that really has like much more depth analysis of what you just spoke,
So I think that before lockdown also, I was able to visit Pitcha with friends. So I had been thinking about these things, and in 2020, it rained a lot in Pakistan, in Karachi. And I think major parts of the city were flooded. So I mean, and I think that there is a belief in Karachi, at least, that Abdullah Shah Ghazi is a saint who protects like Karachi from some sort of coastal calamities, but also intervenes when natural sort of climate systems emerge. So I think that people were also framing 2020, what happened in the summer of 2020, as a happening that Abdullah Shah Ghazi did not he did not step in because it was sort of manufactured and not natural. And the same thing happened last year when it rained a lot all over Pakistan. So I think that that's quite interesting that we have grown up with all of these ideas, and I think that people are now finally thinking about and sort of making or at least are able to distinguish between what is human made and what is natural in terms of like climate catastrophe or natural disasters. So I think that I think I've been thinking about this for a long time also, and I think that there's a network of 7 saints around Karachi, but nobody knows exactly who they are, and Abdullah Shah Ghazi is the only one who protects the city for real. And I really think that there's something about this act of believing that I find fascinating. And I mean, I've grown up. I mean, for the earlier part of my life, I was in Karachi, but then I moved away from here in 1997. And when I was in Karachi growing up, I mean, going to shrines was definitely a big part of that. So I think that, yeah, so I think that it was an important part of growing up. And then since coming back to Karachi in 2013, I think that I've been slowly becoming interested in these things. Also because I think that the folks that I've been hanging out with, my friends have been interested in these things. So slowly thinking about how to sort of think about things that a lot of people are thinking about in sort of slightly different ways with different textures. I mean, which is not to say that this is different or new, because I think that millions of people believe in this, just sort of thinking about that.
That's great. And I think, I think in your second part of the presentation, you kind of took us from the coast of Karachi to the Swiss Alps, and you described one of the recent residency. The project kind of put an emphasis on the act of healing within the context of the ecological destruction that is kind of taking place simultaneously around the world. So can you please tell us more about how you kind of engage with the surroundings and also the local community in the project? Like, what was the emphasis on that? Like,
I think that one great thing about these residencies, or at least the residencies that I've been on so far, is that I think that there's a turn towards research, and deliverables are not necessarily like required. So it can be like the ways in which a residency pans out can be quite experimental. So that was really, very rewarding in the sense that, I was able to sort of walk a lot. I was able to cook a lot and like think about plants and water, because the residency was also right next to a body of water, like a river that's supposed to have healing properties. And I think in the Swiss Alps, or at least where I was in Schkol, a lot of these like sort of bath houses or hotels had come up around these like natural healing springs or sources of water. So this residency was formerly a bathhouse. So and like people sort of turn to land in particular ways to kind of pick herbs and think about water. And then you can also, I think that one great thing in Switzerland, which is like kind of we're not able to do in Pakistan now, is that, or we have not been able to do in Pakistan for a long time, perhaps, is that like, I mean, the drinking sources of water everywhere, right? So you can just like show up with your water bottle and just drink water from a lot of places and you're okay. But I think that was also interesting that a lot of these sources had different tasting water, which was not something that I've experienced before. So I think that what was also like really, really wonderful about this particular residency was that because the residency was kind of I think that there was a shared kitchen, and I think that a lot of conversations and learning happened at the dining table in the kitchen, because that became a place where everyone gathered. So I think that I think I was able to kind of also like really sort of inhabit more fully like some of the things that I was thinking about. I think that I mentioned hospitality in my sort of proposal when I kind of applied, but I think that yeah, I think I got to sort of participate in some of it, or like at least be able to kind of I don't know. I mean, save me. I don't know. Rescue me. I don't know. I don't know how to sort of frame this. I don't know. I think that practice it, right? I mean, how do you practice hospitality? And I think that was interesting because I mean, I've always been able to sort of cook and think about food, but I mean, and I mean, but I never thought that that I would turn to it to sort of think about work, So I think that is a new direction that I'm thinking about, or that's a new direction that's emerging.
No, this is great because I think it also brings back what Sabi said that during the introduction, that the studios, as they kind of conceive, not just kind of, they're kind of temporal in different spaces. So studios not necessarily as a physical entity, right? Like the kitchen kind of became a studio where the conversations kind of took place, whether it's online or virtual or physical. I think they're kind of blurring the boundaries. I think that is the kind of emphasis is that kind of we want to bring on the table in the conversation. That studio is a network of sites, and I think that came out quite well in what you just spoke. So I think moving on to your third project, which I think you kind of started working on in 2016, and your shift from ecological to a very personal narrative. And in your presentation, you kind of also spoke about your father's experience in 1971. And despite of this momentary nature, the house that was built in the project had a makeshift kind of a nomadic feel to it. And then at the same time also allowing memories to stored while resonating with the momentary nature of the structure itself. Could you like describe this project more in detail, because it also has different layer when it comes to how you shifted from a landscape to like from coastal to landscape to personal. So a transition, like what kind of prompt you to work with this very personal narrative?
Yeah, I think it took me a long time to sort of come around to sort of appreciating my own sort of histories and my own background, because I think that I left Pakistan to study like early on, and I think that when you're kind of young and outside, you just want to blend in and disappear and not stand out too much. And so I think that by the time I came back to Pakistan, I think that my work was also kind of quite nondescript, and I think it took a lot of undoing of what I had sort of allowed my work to become, to kind of I mean, I think that the shape it is in now, I think that it is because of being in Karachi and being around parents and being around histories that that I've learned, And the area of Karachi that I live in, I have in 2013, that I mean, it still is. This area is basically like a giant construction site. So so I mean, I think that the structure that you see in that piece, Untitled from 2016, is also a ubiquitous kind of structure that you would see on construction sites all over Phase 8 THA. So I think that there's something about that structure that's just like put together very, very quickly, but then bricks are not necessarily cemented together, right? They're just like loose bricks resting on top of one another. So it goes up very, very quickly, and it kind of comes down very, very quickly. So I like that, even though it's sort of quite sturdy, it is transient in nature, in that it can come undone. And even if even if you're inside that space, as you're watching the work, you sort of feel the bricks moving a little bit, and even though there's no possibility of collapse because it's quite like sturdy, but there's that movement. And I think that kind of really encapsulated sort of what being in Karachi felt like, at least where I lived in 2016, and I just also really think that so much of so many histories that we kind of inhabit are sort of are things that we're not able to kind of bear witness to or talk openly, because there's a lot of there's fear of like of disappearance or of being silenced, right? So I think that so I think I was just also like thinking about ways to sort of make space that could make accessible this history, but then that space had to also be like kind of transient in nature, so as to not make me or my family too visible, right? Because I think that it sort of was kind of challenging the state project of Eurasia in a very particular way. So I think that yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that it is a very specific reference that I think that is still all around me, because where I live is still very much a giant construction site. The landscape is just like the land is always shifting and new structures are coming up. So
That's great. I think, I mean, it also, and most of the cities in the world are in a constant flux, right? The construction is, I mean, like we are in Dubai, and there's like all that we see is like construction popping up every alternate day. I think it's kind of common factor, and I think you really was able to encapsulate that within the project itself. And I think kind of like we kind of looked at now very zoom in perspective. Now let's zoom out a little bit of like, because we kind of spoke about T projects. There is a very complex relationship of multiple scales and perspectives in your work. Like that's what we were kind of looking at right now, and almost like mapping the memories of the constant change that is taking place. And your presentation kind of switches between the multiple perspectives to highlight your observation. But what kind of motivates you for this approach, and what are the ways in which like the studio in a sense kind of facilitates it? Like studio does not, I'm not speaking about your studio as you rightly occupy, but the kind of city as a studio that's what we initially referred in a conversation.
So scales and what was the other thing? Sorry, I'm just going to write it.
That's okay. I think scales and perspectives. It's like you're almost mapping memories to the constant change, and there was a constant switch between multiple perspectives in your presentation, because sometimes we were looking at the coastline, then there was a kind of a zoom out level, and then again a zoom in level. So there's a constant that back and forth that was happening. So how do we kind of read that? Like what kind of motivates you to think about this?
So I don't have a practice where I know from the get-go what a thing needs to be. I think an idea tells me what it needs to be in the world and how it needs to be in the world. And I think that more often than not, I think that the forms come to me when I know where the work is going to be shown or where it's going to be placed. So I think that I don't think in linear in one direction, because I think that I'm the ways in which I work mirror the ways in which my brain is trying to sort of make sense of an inquiry unfolding. So I think I work across like different mediums or different things, and then when I get to the exhibition sort of space or where the work is going to be shown, I think that you see like different scales and different perspectives, because I mean, that is me making sense of how a thing is unfolding, how an inquiry is unfolding. So I mean, you'll zoom into a plant, but then you'll also kind of zoom out and see a video projection. So I think that a lot of these things sort of sit in one space or one exhibition space. Yeah, and for the most part, that is also the first time I'm seeing all of these things together, because I don't have a lot of space in my conventional studio, right? I think I also turned to the conventional studio to sort of, let's say, work on two-dimensional things. And I think that a lot of different things that you see in my practice come together at the actual sort of exhibition, sort of at the actual sort of at the gallery or at an exhibition venue. So yeah, and I think that a lot of scale is also determined by how much space one has, right? So I think that even if I'm making a very, very big thing, I'm more often than not able to see it in the ways that it is going to be sort of shown. So I think that if you're sort of thinking about scales, then during my undergraduate training, I took an architectural drawing class. So I was taught how to read floor plans. So I think more often than not, I kind of turn to the floor plan very, very religiously, and I place work on it. And I think as I'm doing it, I can almost see what the work is going to do in space. So the work is made in parts and then assembled together. And a lot of different folks are kind of involved in the making of it. So as Sabi mentioned at the start of the conversation, that printing happens somewhere else and then welding happens somewhere else. And at the exhibition space, all of these things come together. And that is more often than not the first time I'm also seeing it. I mean,
I think we have, it did, and we also have a very limited time considering. So I think if before we kind of venture into any public Q&A, I just have a last question. Then I will hand over to Sabi to kind of conclude the session, and like if there are any questions from the public. I think again, like continuing from your conversation just now, you spoke about the erasure of histories and memories by nation states. And I think your practice also is very alert to this, right? And in that context, there is an emphasis you kind of place on materiality of your surroundings and your friendships and shared resources. Could you please kind of elaborate on how these dots kind of connect to you, and perhaps like offers us a clue into the temporal habitation that studio becomes, because I think even in your presentation towards the end, you spoke about different people that help you to kind of conceive projects together. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I talked about this already, that I think that by the time I was coming out of undergrad, my work also looked like anyone else, like it could have been anyone's work. And I think that I was very, very fortunate to land the friendships that I did in Karachi because I got here and I made friends fairly quickly. And a lot of my friends are also artists. And so I think that it's been sort of so wonderful to kind of turn to them for advice. I don't think that I've done anything since like forever that's not been through like a network of a network of friends before anyone gets to see it. And yeah, I also had a collaborative practice with Syra Sheikh, who was also a very, very good friend. So I think that that friendships and all of these things are very, very central to the ways in which I think about and make work. And I think that so much of making work in South Asia, I think that one constantly has to hear or engages with the fact that there are not a lot of resources, but I think that one is able to kind of multiply time by working together and sort of multiply knowledge by turning to friends and see different positions. So I think that this network has been really, 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 really amazing to sort of think with and be with. And it's not just Karachi, right? I think that as I've worked, I've also have developed friendships in Sri Lanka and Delhi, and more often than not, I think that I'm equally as comfortable reaching out to friends in Delhi as I am to friends in Karachi. So I think that as these borders are becoming like more concrete and less transgressible, I think that I think that these networks, online networks, and Instagram and WhatsApp, I think they allow us to kind of work together and be together and make work in very meaningful sort of ways, right? And I think that by doing that, I think that we're also just sort of challenging the ways in which the state wants us to operate or be in the world, you know, isolated and compartmentalized.
Thank you so much. Sabi, may I request that you please conclude?
Sure.
And
No,
then
so
questions.
we still have questions coming in from the
Yeah.
audience. Before we take audience questions, thank you, Omer. I have a question too, which is that, you know, when we first saw a draft of your video presentation that you'd sent before today's screening, we had an internal discussion between us colleagues, me, Himanshu, Asavri, Manmita, and we were talking about, or rather Asavri raised this question, but you know, he hasn't shown any pictures of the studio itself. So, or any kind of space that he works in where works are produced. And I know that while we're trying to complicate the idea of the studio, we're also trying to see it's very corporeal, very material kind of forms, you know, like what are the places where you work? What are the factories, welding metal places, all of those? And clearly you've made a choice not to show them at all. Because in the previous presentations of the Alt+Shift+Studio artists, we had Zainab, who's based in Srinagar, who literally shows us pictures of the bed and the blanket where she scans and edits images, her garden, and the office. So those that kind of becomes an important this thing, along with the routes and checkpoints. Vikram Devecha made a presentation showing the tunnels and the places where they cut these tiles that go into the tunnels of Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah, and how that becomes an integral part of his practice. And Jasmine showed her kitchen, as well as a number of other places, bus stops, buses, all kinds of locomotive vehicles, which are so integral to her kind of space of work, you know? So your deliberate avoidance is something I wanted to ask about. And I also want to add, just for those viewing today, that actually you're among the very few artists who started off in our conversations when we approached you to say that actually I do have a conventional idea of a studio. I do have a little like space where I sit, think, make works while there's a network. So you clearly avoided showing any of those places of work. And if you can tell us why, I think that would be good for us to know.
Yeah, I think I have. I mean, I've worked with wonderful people in Karachi, and I think they've been so central to my practice over the years. But I think that I'm just. I think that a lot of these. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, I don't feel comfortable sort of taking my camera along and sort of taking pictures. And even though I have in the past, I think I decided to kind of not do it, because more often than not, I think that that Karachi is a very, very difficult city. And I think that it's just, it's perhaps a challenging city to work in. And I think that more often than not, I think that people are also working in unsafe conditions and challenging conditions. And it really felt like, it to me felt like an intrusion, because I mean, I think, yeah, so I decided, I don't know if that answers your question, but I decided to kind of not do that.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. Basically, there's an ethical choice you're making of not having the camera invade other people's workspaces, or your own, in fact. And that's why I suppose you've kind of shared it verbally rather than show visuals of it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just I think it's just I find it difficult to kind of, and also I think I'm not really particularly attached to my camera or my phone. So I mean, I think the documentation I think that taking a picture has become a thing, like, I mean, it feels like work now, now that I've started showing images as work sometimes. So I think that there is a little bit of reluctance, which is not to say that I've not taken pictures of like pictures in Pakistan chalk, for example, I have, but I decided to kind of not include it because I think that people work in difficult difficult situations, and it's like, yeah, and places are full of fumes, and it's just feels like difficult to kind of,
to just share it maybe in a sensitive way. We have two questions from the audience. They both seem quite connected, so I'm going to read them both together and you can answer. One's from Richi Bhatia, and she asks, would you say that your practice is also a way of journaling about your absorption of the social, personal, and geographical? And sort of quite connected to that is a question from Mudassir, who asks, do you have certain daily rituals that keep you grounded and connected to your creativity? Something that has helped you develop your practice over the years? Is writing an important part of how your projects come together? So journaling from Richi and writing from Mudassir. Writing and rituals.
Journaling. I think I don't necessarily have a journaling practice, but I would not frame my practice as a maybe I'm able to
as
sort
a way of
see your
journaling.
questions also. Yeah. So I mean, I don't necessarily think of my practice the way of journaling, but I mean, sometimes I do make notes on my phone. I think that I refer to sometimes, but I think that the ways in which I write text for projects often sort of, I mean, it might read like a journal at times, but that is a very, very deliberate kind of choice. Yeah, I think whenever I think about the word journaling, I think of it as also something that is like quick and fleeting, but I think that whenever I'm working on a particular project or an idea, I think that there's just so much sort of time and space has gone into it, that I think that, to me at least, the ways in which I think about journaling, it sort of surpasses that stage, where even if it reads like a journal, I think that that's a very deliberate
style.
That is a very deliberate framing of the text.
Yeah. And do you maintain daily rituals to keep you grounded in your creativity?
Daily rituals.
Is there an aspect of writing also, perhaps?
I don't have a daily writing practice, but I mean, I wake up very, very early. I wake up at between 5 and 6 every day. And I think that the first thing I do is I have my coffee and I don't do anything for like at least an hour or an hour and a half. Nothing is very, very particular about this, and I don't allow anything to take over that time.
Wow.
So I think that I mean, maybe it has become, maybe it's become a ritual, but
it's early. It's not very, very early.
Maybe I'll aim for 4, like in a couple of years. But yeah, I think that is just getting a head start, and then not doing anything for a little bit is I think important for me.
So that's your ritual, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
I think.
We have no audience questions, and we've also crossed time. So since we have no other questions, I'm going to conclude the session. So thank you very much, Omer. This was very enlightening. I think very illuminating about your practice. I think what my big takeaway was to really see so up close a kind of precarity of ecology that's protected by the sacred. And that's something that's so present for you. That can sometimes be haunting too. It's scary if you think about the place where you work, the place where you live, as being protected by jinns, but also maybe not sometimes. So that sacred kind of informing your awareness as you do work is I think quite unique from all the other presentations we've had. Sorry, I think one more question came in. I hope everyone doesn't mind bearing with one more question. We'll just take it. It just popped in, and since there are so few, I think it would be nice to do it. So there's a question from Sri Jyotish who asks, do you think about how distant or close the subject matter of these projects are with yourself and make active choices in how present the self is in what you've shared?
I think that inquiry is, I mean, when I kind of think about the texture of inquiry, I think that I kind of sense it as something that sort of emerges from within. So I think that it's like always inward. I think that sometimes I think that there's outward energy also, but I think that that the ways in which I think about my work is that there's always a straddling between like, or there's a line between, like not a line perhaps, but there is a balance between looking inward and outward also. So I think that yeah, I don't know if I'm answering. Let me read this. Do you think that? Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't think about distance necessarily. I think the way I kind of think about proximity and distance would be that, I mean, am I looking inward or outward? And I think that more often than not, I think that the ways in which I work are kind of both simultaneously. You know, I think that even if it is performing a particular function in the world, it is also kind of, to a certain degree, looking inward. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it's a good answer to whether you're distant from subject matter or close to the subject matter, and actually, in a way, you're always in the subject matter, is what it sounds like. And while you're in it, you're both looking out and in at the same time. Yeah. So now I will conclude. And any more questions, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take. So thank you, Omer. This was an illuminating presentation. For all those attending, a recording of all the presentations this season are going to go on the Shara website, so you can follow us and our social media. While they're not present, or at least not all of them are present, I want to also extend my thanks again to all the previous participants of the program, Zainab, Vikram Devecha, and Jasmine Ilani Joseph, all of whom made really wonderful and very different presentations. And while we looked at a certain kind of precarity in your presentation, an ecological, economic, infrastructural precarity surrounded by the sacred, we saw other kinds of precarities governed by infrastructures or life in other cities, a certain kind of precarity of labor in the Gulf, a certain precarity of a war-torn landscape, still recovering from an economic crisis at the same time, in Jaffna, and a place under military occupation in the city of Kashmir. So I think we covered some really extraordinary ground, and seeing how really artists work in such remarkable ways in all of these environments. And it really speaks also to the theme that was the focus of this time's summer program that Himanshu curated, Fractured Grids. I think a big takeaway for me from this entire season was also that, you know, we generally divide art and life, work and life, work and life balance, art and everyday and those kinds of things. But what we saw in all of these sessions was the life of art practice, you know, and that life of art practice is one which occupies so many spaces and builds so many relationships, so that art is not merely work. There's a life of work. There's a life of art that is coming through, and it came through very much in your presentation. And I loved what you said about multiplying, you know, like there was a moment when you spoke about how possibilities multiply, how spaces multiply in your practice. And I thought that's really telling, because if you think about it, we generally tend to divide time between, you know, chores and work and whatever. We also tend to divide spaces, a place to work, a place to live, a place to sleep, a place to eat. But maybe what art does is not divide things, it actually multiplies everything. Things keep multiplying, spaces multiply, life multiplies, work multiplies, all these multiplications happen into one another. So a big thank you for that. A big thank you also to all the audience members who came, and a big thank you to people who are not visible today, but who were involved in putting together this program. Nikhil KC, who was the video editor for the video we saw today, prepared by Omer. Also the Ishara team, with Sabri Sehgal, who's been leading our outreach and PR for Ishara generally, and especially for this program, also brainstorming with us. Manmita, who's our admin assistant and has also been helping with a lot of the admin support, and Santosh. So a big thank you to everyone, to the Ishara team. We'll be keeping you posted on our social media platform about the recordings going up. So thank you again, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.